And so when I look at the state of DEI and this high level of resistance, it's many folks saying, okay, well, I thought I was doing the work, but I don't see a change and now I'm tired. Or I did the work for a little bit and oof, I'm over it.
Welcome to Candid Minds with Dr. T. I'm Dr. Tamir Aldad, addiction psychiatrist and CEO of Mindful Care, the first ever psychiatric urgent care committed to providing affordable and accessible mental health care. Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm Dr. Tamir Aldad, addiction psychiatrist and the CEO of Mindful Care. Today, we're going to be discussing diversity, equity, and inclusion, and understanding the importance of DEI programs in the workplace and discussing a little bit what DEI programs could potentially have as an effect on the mental health of employees and staff. Early on, when DEI was established as an initiative, I think the goal and the perspective of introducing diversity, equity, inclusion for various minorities was very well intentioned, particularly with increasing opportunity for those that otherwise might not have opportunities, diversifying the workplace, changing it from a very homogenous to a heterogeneous environment, celebrating differences, introducing new viewpoints. But over time, I think the perspective of DEI and its actual effect and impact have changed. And today we'll be discussing a little bit of that. I can tell you, as someone who runs a large mental health company, we're fortunate enough to have a very diverse population of clinicians, employees, and staff members. And that happens for multiple reasons. We're very much blinded to the process of how we hire, and then we very much encourage growth within the organization and try to foster opportunities for such growth by creating programs and initiatives and allowing our employees to thrive. So celebrating diversity does take effort, and we'll be discussing that a little bit today, and we'll be focusing on what has changed over time with DEI programs, and we'll try to figure out what the future really holds in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion for organizations. So it'll be an exciting conversation. I'm excited you'll be joining us. We'll also talk a little bit about how DEI can help businesses achieve their goals and how a DEI program, if executed correctly, can add value. One of my guests today is a good friend, Netta Jenkins. Netta is the CEO of AeroDai. AeroDai is an inclusive performance platform, and she's an industry expert on how to effectively bring DEI principles into the workplace. She's been doing it for 15 years, has a lot of really great insight, and we're going to have a great conversation understanding what is being done correctly, what isn't, what needs to change. Why has there been growing resistance, which is interesting, particularly because DEI was celebrated for a long time, and now we're seeing the perspective change. We'll focus a little bit on some common misconceptions around DEI and where we think the future of DEI is headed. So I'm excited to welcome her, and I'm glad you're joining us. I'd like to welcome Netta Jenkins to the show. She's a good friend and the CEO of AeroDai, an inclusive performance platform and an expert on DEI, which we've been discussing on this episode. Netta, share with our viewers a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me on your show. I've been in the DEI space for over 15 plus years. Both of my parents, I always like to start off with where they came from. They're both from Liberia. They then migrated to Rhode Island, right? The smallest
Wow.
state in the US. Not sure why, still trying to figure that one out. And that was in the 80s. And I grew up in a predominantly white identifying neighborhood. We experienced overt racism. So there was an experience I always share where I was 7 years old. There was a white woman that had walked into our yard and proclaimed blacks don't belong in my neighborhood, and then
Wow.
proceeded to spit in my mother's face. And it wasn't just, the soft spit, it was the phlegm. And so at a very infectious age of 7, I watched that. I could feel the tension within my mom. And I could also feel her thinking, well, what do I do? Do I react? And we all know that reaction. Or do I just turn around and hold my daughter's hand and go back into the house? And her decision was to hold my hand, and we turned around, we went back in the house, we never unpacked it. But I remember going back into my room, getting on my knees and vowing to never be silent again. And so really that's when advocating for those that were voiceless was really, really important to me. And that led into, going to college and then getting into corporate America, and seeing some of those barriers and inequities as well.
Such an event leaves serious impact, but if you channel that energy correctly, you could do great work, which you have been doing. So you have been channeling it well.
Yeah.
And as an advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion, there seems to be a shift in the narrative,
Yeah.
and in the conversation. And it seems like some people are even resistant now to DEI initiatives when previously it was celebrated. Can you
Yeah.
speak a little bit to what you're seeing and why that's changing?
Yeah, it's very interesting to see this shift take place because we all know of the murder of Mr. George Floyd, and
Mm,
the world was on hold essentially. So we all watched that moment, and I think many people that haven't thought about racism in America or discrimination or prejudice or anything on that level finally got to see it very overtly. And that really
mm,
shifted the landscape of people wanting to eagerly learn, wanting to also do something and create that shift. But I think a part of that was also, I want to create the shift, but I'm afraid to do the work and look in the mirror. And a part of looking in the mirror too was many of us having to understand what happened historically, right? What are some of these things that happened historically that has us so divided just as human beings? When at the end of the day, we are just humans, right? With various colors.
mm,
Some of us have olive skin tone, some of us white, some of us brown, some of us black, right? And so it's really kind of taking a look back and reflecting on, well, one, who do I identify as? Like, who am I? What are things that I overlooked or maybe perhaps did not even see? And how did they affect people around me? And why didn't I see that? And that's very hard to do, right? You
mm.
think about it, I always like to kind of bring things back on a very basic level. You think about a relationship with your partner, you get in an argument with your partner. If I think about like getting in an argument with my husband, and he may apologize, but he's not talking about the root of the issue.
Right.
Right? We haven't really gotten over that just yet, right? So then we have to kind of talk about, okay, well, what's the history behind this? Like, why is this affecting me, or why is this affecting you? And it's that same concept. And so when I look at the state of DEI and this high level of resistance, it's many folks saying, okay, well, I thought I was doing the work, but I don't see a change, and now I'm tired. Or I did the work for a little bit and whew, I'm over it. Right. Some organizations are saying, hey, well, we try to take some actions. Granted, maybe some were performative. We try to take some actions, and oh, but we're still lacking in representation, or we haven't increased in that way. And for organizations, when I ask leaders, what is DEI? Many of them say it's diversity recruiting.
Mm,
That means that we have to bring in Black people and Hispanic and Latin people and Asian people and women, and then the intersectionalities that like folks forget about,
yeah.
right? And it's not folks really kind of taking a step back and saying, what are we really solving for? And so when I talk to organizations, I say DEI simply wants to advance every single person within the organization. So when I tell leaders that, they're like, oh, so if DEI is solving to advance everyone in the organization, that's great. Okay. But if that's the case, then we have to dig deeper. Well, then who's not advancing and why?
Hmm.
We like
Mm,
owe it to ourselves to then ask. It's even beneficial for an organization, right? You want to understand in my organization which departments aren't doing well. Is the marketing department compared to the finance department? Maybe the finance department didn't do well. Maybe there's um, folks can't be retained in that department. Well, then we have to assess why. Who's in that
hmm.
department? Who's leading? What type of resources and support do they have? How, like, what is the root issue? And that is what DEI really solves for. And then we start getting into race and ethnicity and all of these other intersectional identities like caregivers and veterans. And
Sure.
um, so there's a lot there, but
From a framing perspective, if it really is a commitment to the advancement of everyone, and it sounds incredibly positive, right? Which is great, and then that's how it should be framed. But there's also this fear that the pendulum is swinging too far the other way, right? Everyone's trying to correct and learn and be more inclusive, and as a psychiatrist and a mental health professional, one thing I fear is that it'll be perceived by people who originally would benefit from the added support towards the advancement as though now they're a charity, and now the organization is seeing them as, we have to help you because
yeah.
if you weren't Black or you weren't Latino, you probably wouldn't advance here, so we've hired you extra help. How do you make sure that you're not now, it can go from
And I
supportive
think, right.
to like offensive? Like, why was I giving, wait, so I get you had good intentions, but now I was given a coach, so
Mhm.
how do you navigate that so it stays with that positive tone you were talking about and doesn't become as though you've been singled out because you're at risk for not advancing, so here's extra help? I mean, there's a fine line there.
It's definitely a fine line, but it goes back to the how, right? And the why. And so
Hmm.
again, if we're looking at it at a very high level and an organization is saying this particular department is not doing well, and because it's not doing well, we're not as profitable as last year, right? And so now you take a look at, well, who's leading, right? And the way that I think about this is, let's say it's an engineering department and there's a process gap. What will a manager say? Well, I need to hire someone immediately, bring someone on board to fix that. You bring someone
Sure.
on board to fix that, immediately you're thinking about someone that maybe you've worked with in the past. And eventually it'll become someone that looks like you, right? Thinks like you. I need someone that thinks just like me. I do the same thing, right? Many of
Yeah.
us as human beings, we operate in that way of, okay, who am I comfortable with? Who do I know that, can hit the ground running, that knows this already? But what we end up doing is now we're not having a holistic lens on, but are we missing out on an opportunity and a perspective that could drive this work forward, that can not only fix this process, but bring other people in so we know we never have that barrier again. And that's what
Hmm.
organizations tend to miss out on. It's not us just looking at it from a lens of, well, we need to bring on more, Latin, Hispanic
Yeah.
people, more Black people. It's, what are the gaps here that we're experiencing? If we're really identifying and taking a look at the reports and the research about productivity and about retention and what drives employees, and it's saying that having a diverse population internally will drive,
Sure.
from a financial and productivity perspective, then why wouldn't we hone in on that to make sure that people are able to advance? And then it goes back to
Yeah.
the question of ensuring that organizations aren't tokenizing people or saying, well, here's my support, right?
Hmm.
Oh, or you're not worthy of this, so you can have this position and you should be happy with that. They're losing out by thinking that way, right? And
No,
again,
absolutely. I think I've noticed that in very homogenous organizations, there's a lack of creativity in the room because everyone's perspective can only go so far. And if everyone has the same cultural upbringing or comes from the same country or sees the same things, sees the world through the same lens, the creativity is limited by that,
and I'll give
right?
you,
And
yeah,
it's
I'll give you a
kind of,
perfect,
you're working with your hands tied.
yeah, no, that's such a great point. I'll give you a perfect example of that. Working at before I became CEO of AeroDai, and I was working within a fintech organization. Before
Hmm.
I got into that organization and I met with the CEO and board member, I said, I'm going to create a product that will be one of the biggest products in the world, right? And they kind of both looked at me like, wait, Netta, we hired you as VP of Global Inclusion, and you're here talking about product and engineering. But do you see my mindset, right? I'm
Hmm.
coming in with a mindset. I have immigrant parents, African parents at that. It's
Right.
a mindset of education. It's a mindset of don't you box yourself in. Your title will not define you, right?
Yeah.
So I'm coming in with a different perspective and mindset as to how I even navigate within the workplace that frankly many people don't think about, right? We just go to
For
work,
sure.
put our head down, and that's it. And so to make that statement, but then to also begin working on a platform without permission within an organization is a whole
Mhm.
nother level. And then I took it a step further because I'm so used to collaborating. Now I'm leaning on engineers. I'm so used to building relationships. And again, that's just through my experience and my lens of growing up. I had to lean on family. I had to lean on other people
Yeah.
in the community, right? I'm bringing those same concepts within the workplace and I'm now connecting with folks. And I take it to another step. And I actually build this platform. And what we do is we take those insights and we plug that into an RFP, and the organization ended up winning an $8 million RFP. Now, the
Wow.
leaders were like, wait, hold on. How did this happen? Right? How did this happen? And now they were able to kind of navigate the platform. They were really excited about it, but they saw the business impact of it and they saw the high level of employee engagement. And then I took it a step further and I also shared with the CEO, I said, hey, this is something we need to take to market. And because he saw from the beginning of when I joined that organization how I navigated, his mindset became different, right? Like it
Mm.
shifted in
Yeah.
where he then contacted me and said, Netta, this is something you need to do on your own. I'm like, oh crap, are you firing me? He's like, no, I'm investing in you and invested 500,000. So you never hear of the CEO that will then go ahead and invest, in something that you've created within an organization. You just don't hear those stories. But again, I bring it
Yeah.
back to the very topic that we're talking about. We cannot underestimate the power of experience, the power
Sure.
of what maybe even being different, right? And the value that they bring for an organization, the
Yeah.
value that
I
they
mean,
bring to the people around them as well.
no, 100%. I'm first generation myself, and I think
Wow.
the resilience that I had to have growing up, serving as an interpreter to my parents, and like, I think I grew up way too quickly sometimes because I was doing things at 7, 8 years old, helping them navigate the world, and my friends were out playing, and
Yeah.
I had to go to the doctor to translate. I had to help read the mail, and like the resilience and like the perseverance, the work ethic. There's things that come with being first generation that someone else might not be able to appreciate. And they bring other things to the table, right? We all bring different things, so it's refreshing to do that. And then your story is a beautiful example of what happens when you diversify the thought process at the table. So I think that's
Yeah.
awesome. And I'm curious if someone does have a program for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and they're committed to it. One of the ways that people measure its success is, well, how diverse is the organization? I feel even just from this conversation that that's really selling it short. The number of Latinos you have doesn't mean you're succeeding from a diversity, and you might
Doesn't
have
mean
just,
they're happy.
it doesn't mean anything really. You
Yeah.
might have just hired a bunch of Latinos, right? So
Right.
how do you know that you're truly having an impact and the work you're doing is meaningful? How do you measure that?
Yeah, that was one of the hardest things, honestly, and the frustrating thing. And one of the reasons why I had built AeroDai, because I wanted to speak to different audiences. I wanted to be able to speak to the leaders that maybe frankly didn't understand the work, but they understood business impact. So I wanted to align inclusion efforts to new customer acquisition, RFP wins, to brand equity, right? All of these things that they look at. Then we have the audience, which is the chief people officer, the chief diversity officer, the ERGs that are passionate. And they're saying, hey, we see the barriers and the gaps. In fact, we feel the barriers and gaps. And I
Hmm.
wanted for them to see through their inclusive efforts that they were gaining recognition and credit and that they could see themselves progress. And then you have this third group that just doesn't give a damn. It's like, I don't
Yeah,
care. I come from inherited. Like, I don't care about this. This is the worst. DEI must die.
sure.
But the way that I thought about that, and again, it's from like kind of my behavioral psychology lens is once someone continues to do a behavior over and over, they start to become ingrained in it. And there's
Right.
gamification elements to the platform that allows, uh, that population of people that may not care, even if they're going into it, they may be going into it for their points, but they start to see in order for you to even gain the points, you're making these inclusive actions. And now they understand how these things pour right back into them and right back into their teams and how it benefits the organization. So for me, it was really about how do we get away from the diversity reports that
Right.
don't tell us anything really, other than, okay, here's the representation, but how are people progressing?
Hmm.
How are people collaborating? What's the productivity level? And so those are the measurements that I look for within the platform, and I can automate that with technology.
I love that. You're doing great work. Always a pleasure to hear your insight and your input. I know you're busy. I appreciate you taking some time to share your thoughts with our listeners. So thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Excellent conversation. Thank you, Netta Jenkins, for joining us. Really enjoyed chatting with you as always, and think it's really important to understand the differences between creating a homogenous work environment and workplace where there's less creativity, less ideas, or celebrating diversity and welcoming ideas and creativity and various thoughts, perspectives, as a healthy opportunity to challenge one another to pursue different goals and objectives, and creating an environment where you feel safe, encouraged, inspired, motivated as a staff member and employee to be a part of the conversation, even if it challenges the status quo. That at the core is what real effective DEI programs are about. I mentioned this in the interview as well, and someone who grew up first generation here in the US, there's things from my upbringing that are very different from someone who has been here for many years, right? And there were obstacles that came with having parents that immigrated here and navigating that with them. And perhaps I could lean on some of those experiences with a problem that may not be very similar to something I experienced before, but there could be parallels there. And there could be things that I recognize from a pattern recognition perspective, let's say. And I'll highlight that and say, well, I recognize this, and this is something that I've done in the past that has been helpful. Could we do something like that here? Right. And that is what I think DEI programs really need to encourage. And we do that at Mindful Care as well. And we certainly strive for that, but everyone needs to strive for that. Right. And what happens is companies that have a lot of social impact and are sensitive to these things, I believe, are probably more equipped to be successful, but that doesn't mean everyone can't be successful. And we need to create an environment where it is encouraged and welcomed, both for the mental health and well-being of our staff members and employees, for administrative staff to encourage diversity, and overall, I think if everyone has that type of mindset, we're well on our way to creating a more diverse workplace that encourages growth and success. In some of our other episodes, we talk about mental health and startup culture. I think culture, even though we always say it comes from the top, the tools and the architecture of different initiatives within an organization really dictate that culture, reinforce that culture. And a strong DEI program is very important. And we talked about, at the end of the day, if somebody in an organization feels like they were a token hire or they were promoted as a gesture to meet some sort of quota or become a statistic, I think it's very obvious to that individual, or quickly does become obvious to that individual. And we have to be very, very careful that we're not doing that, right? The quote unquote token position is something that is really a mirage, where effectively, who are we lying to? The organization is lying to itself. The employee is being lied to. Unclear as to what the point is, when it effectively is obvious to everyone. So we really do need to be careful that we're staying true to the underlying purpose of a DEI program, and not turning it into some sort of affirmative action initiative where someone is just a statistic or they're just a token hire. So it really, really is important that we keep going back to our roots and understanding why we're doing this, what's the purpose, what's the mission, and reinforcing that often. So those attitudes are really important. I recognize that generationally, things could be different, and one can argue that different generations might welcome or reject a DEI program, but I would challenge us to see generational differences as another opportunity to celebrate new ideas, new perspectives, and see what those conversations lead to. Somebody who, for example, is from a different generation might have an excellent perspective that a room full of younger individuals can't appreciate or don't realize or don't recognize. So I think that the DEI programs right now that are being challenged, we really need to push back and question, are they really being executed to the true mission of a DEI program? And if not, correct that before we assess their success and their viability. Overall, I think DEI programs are likely here to stay. Despite growing resistance, the criticism should be welcomed. Feedback is always helpful. We have to create an environment where we need to challenge ourselves. If we're talking about challenging individuals and creating resources where everyone can grow and thrive, we need to welcome the resistance ourselves and the feedback. So I don't think DI programs are going anywhere, but want to stay open minded and see how we could be better as organizations, how we create environments where individuals thrive, where we focus on their mental health, where we give them the resources to excel, and we implement effective programs where everyone is a winner at the end. So my goal for DEI programs is that they continue to be executed to their core values and their core mission. Any sort of backlash be welcomed in terms of understanding why there's criticism and trying to extract something positive from that. And we establish and reinforce best practices to make sure that everyone thrives in the organization that they're in, and organizations remain diverse, perspectives remain diverse, and everyone's success is possible. I thank you for joining us. It was really a great conversation. Netta, thank you for being on the show today, and I look forward to seeing everyone again soon. Again, I'm Dr. Aldad from Mindful Care. Thank you for listening. Please follow us or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Please follow us at Mindful Care and at TikTok Psychiatrist for more, and don't forget to rate and review.